Cool. Yo, what's up, bro? Welcome back to the Fapstinence podcast, where we help you find freedom from porn. As always, I'm joined by Peter K, the Peter K himself.
The real Peter K.
I don't know. I was trying to think of like a clever, we'll come up with something in future episodes. Anyway, today what we're talking about is what to expect on a week-by-week basis on No Nut November. So depending on how long you've adopted this lifestyle, taking it week by week doesn't really make much sense, because if you're constantly thinking about this on a short-term basis, it's going to drive you crazy. But at the same time, this is a challenge, and for the vast majority of us who are trying to attempt No Nut November, we're really trying to kick an addiction that, whether you know that you have it or not, it's going to be very, very challenging. Right? So we're going to take this on a week-by-week basis. Just to give you a bit of a background, for me, I did No Nut November for the first time last November, and I've done multiple 30-day streaks since then. And Peter himself has really adopted this lifestyle, and he's way more advanced than I am. So he's going to give us kind of more of a bird's eye view perspective. For me, my experience with No Nut November is a lot more proximal in the sense that I've done it very recently, so I still remember vividly what I went through. But do you want to give the viewers kind of an idea of your kind of no-fap lifestyle experience, so they have kind of an idea of where you're at?
Yeah, Kevin. Well, what I'll say is my addiction started pretty early on. I want to say maybe I was 13, and I turned 30 this year, so you can do the math on that one. But it's something that sticks with you. And I know for me personally, there came a point in time where I met some guys in college who were talking about being addicted to porn. And I remember thinking, wow, that's kind of weird that they're talking about this. I've never heard people admit, first of all, that it's a problem at all. But second of all, that they would say something as strong as the word addiction. And that was pretty eye-opening to me. Because even though I was fapping probably 2 to 3 times a day at certain points of my life, I never even considered that wasn't normal. Especially because everybody, whenever you do hear people talk about porn, it's that it's this normal part of your life, at least in this 21st century. As a millennial, that was my experience of people talking about porn. It was kind of taboo, but it was also pretty normal. It was maybe like a little bit of an edgy thing to talk about, but if you did, it was kind of a pro-porn sentiment. And so I think going forward in this show, that's something we're going to be talking about, is being honest with our dialogue about porn, especially because for me, now that I've been down this road for a while, so I was probably, I want to say 24 when I first started thinking about this as a real problem. And as I said, I turned 30 soon. So you're talking about 6 years. It has not been an easy 6 years. It's an uphill battle. But I think at this point in my life, thankfully, I'm in a place where I know myself pretty well. I know my triggers, and I'm pretty far removed. So thankfully, the first experience of No Nut November is a little bit in the rearview mirror for me. Kevin could talk about that better in some regards, but I think I could give a pretty interesting perspective of what maybe month 2 or month 3 looks like. And I imagine it's not that different, although in a sense it gets easier with time, the more removed you are from that dopamine dependency. And so, Kevin, I'm going to be really interested to hear how your week-by-week breakdown goes, and just to add a little bit of context from maybe this is what it felt like to me month 2 or month 3. But as far as my journey, it's not like I've reached this level of attainment that you haven't, Kevin, I would say. It's just that I've been struggling with it and figuring it out painfully, slowly, a little bit longer than you have.
Yeah, so you haven't gotten to the point where you start levitating off the ground and shooting laser beams out of your eyes.
No, I don't think.
What you're saying.
I don't think there's a bunch more throngs of women coming at me than normal.
It's not like the old Axe body spray commercials where the guy's running on the beach and there's this horde of
It
women
does,
chasing
that
after him
doesn't
'cause he
happen in
smells so
month
good.
2. I don't
Yeah.
think it happens in the first year, because I can tell you it's been a little longer than that for
Yeah.
me, and I haven't had an experience. So
Wow. Yeah. Maybe when you get your 5 years in,
Who
that's
knows?
that's when the hordes
Yeah,
of women will
one
start
can
chasing
only
after
hope
you.
that doesn't happen. I don't think I can explain that to my girlfriend.
Yeah. It's like, I'm sorry. It's
I
just,
can't
I'm
help
so
it.
enlightened. It's just, hey, it's just happening, you know?
No.
Yeah, it's not my fault. Okay, so let's break this down week by week, because the way that I kind of like to view this is like, all right, so imagine Peter is like, I don't know, like a high school or college basketball coach. And for me, I'm teaching the kids that have never dribbled a basketball before, teaching the fundamentals, right? So Peter can still add value because he's more knowledgeable overall, because he has more experience in that. But for me, because I just learned how to dribble, I know exactly what I need
you're an
to do with that,
expert
right?
at dribbling
So
at
hopefully
this
that
point.
analogy kind of makes sense.
Don't cut yourself short.
an expert dribbler,
know the
yes.
short term, that freshness
There
is
you go.
really going to come into play, especially now that we're talking about November. This is going to be the first start for a lot of people.
point.
And if you're down the road, I'm just trying to add a little bit of context to what it might be like if this is your second or third attempt at this, or 15th.
Right on. All right, cool. Yeah, or 15th. All right, so here's what to expect. So we're just going to start with week 1, okay? So now, what typically happens is the first few days, most guys don't struggle too much, even if you're extremely addicted, because if you've just been feeding your brain and your body a certain stimulus for such a long period of time, it's not going to feel that weird immediately. It's actually going to feel pretty good. I mean, typically guys are, they feel quite good. They're like, oh, I feel, less foggy headed, all these types of things the first few days. And then all of a sudden, I swear this happens to myself and everyone else. It's always day 3. Day 3 is when the urges start arising. And typically, you can use your willpower a bit to just like carry on through that. Your ego takes over a bit. It's like, really, I'm going to fail on day 3? Or it's like, I'm not going to let myself fail on day 3. So typically most guys, and myself included, whenever I relapse and I have to restart again, I can get over day 3. And then what I notice is day 4 and 5 usually isn't that bad. And then somewhere around day 6 or 7, the urges become really, really tough again and really strong. And typically this is actually where I see some, I've heard a lot of guys drop off. This is where I've seen myself drop off in the past as well, when I was doing a separate streak that was outside of November. As a general rule, you want to just expect every 3 or 4 days for a pretty strong urge to come about. Now, there's a few reasons for this. There's actually a Chinese study that was done showing that men who abstain from any kind of orgasm for a week, their testosterone was highly elevated. When your testosterone is in a more elevated state, naturally you're going to be, hornier, right? So that's something to keep in mind. So the week 1, you can willpower your way through it, but psychology is very clear on kind of like the function of willpower in terms of behavior change. If you could basically imagine willpower as like a muscle fatigues over time. So if you just completely use willpower throughout your entire first week just to get through it, you're not going to have the willpower required to go through week 2, week 3, week 4. That's why we talk about environment is so key. All right. But anyway, I mean, you could refer back to previous episodes of us talking about that. But that's something to definitely expect during week 1. Is the first few days, you're probably going to be okay. It's not going to be that big of a deal. You're going to feel great. You're going to have your first urge usually around day 3 or so. And then after that, you're going to feel it again day 6 or 7, I've noticed, almost without fail. But the lucky part is once you get over those first 2 humps, I've noticed that for me personally and for other guys that I've helped and talked to, typically they don't feel a strong urge again until later on in week 2, right? So if you feel like your first big urge like at day 3 and then like let's say day 6, then you probably won't feel too tempted again until like day 11 or 12, right? And then after that, what I've noticed is consistently about every week or so, you get like a really strong urge. For some reason, I've always noticed for myself, because I've done multiple, streaks. I always notice week 3 is really, really tough. I don't know why. It's just every single time week 3 is just like, I think it's because, especially if you hit the, you have a goal to go a certain amount of time. When you're in week 3, you realize that you've come so far and you've accomplished. It's kind of like scary to realize you're in the midst of something you've never done before, right? So there's a little bit of anxiety there from that standpoint. Typically, most other guys, to be honest, kind of drop off at this point. They've already given up and they've already relapsed, so you kind of feel alone. But then also you realize, okay, well, damn, I still have almost 2 weeks ahead of me, and I don't know if I could do this. So typically week 3 is quite a crucible, and I noticed that at week 4, because you're so close, whatever willpower you have left, you're kind of motivated to cross the finish line, and you can. It's kind of like if you're running 4 laps around the track. Typically, like the first one's not that bad, the second one's kind of pretty bad, the third one's really bad, and then the fourth one you just kind of grind your way through it. So it's a very similar thing when it comes to this. So much of it, almost all of it, is in between the ears. So do you have anything to add to that,
Yeah,
Peter?
I do have a few things I'd like to add, but also a couple questions I could ask you if you don't mind, Kevin. Yeah, so I'm
Sure.
kind of curious, when people are going through, in your experience, going through that first week, and falling for that first time, uh, is that demoralizing? How do people get past that and keep going? How did you get past that and keep
So
going?
you mean, how did I get past
Well,
those
no, I'm
temptations?
just saying, you talked about in the first week, especially, you're going to have those really strong temptations.
Yeah.
If I fall in the first week, is No No November a failure?
Well, in terms of the competitive aspect, technically you're out, but this is something that I talk about, and we would have to talk about this at a later time, but the way that I look at it is I think a 30-day streak is something that every guy should try to aim for first. And then once they are able to do that, then at that point they should start to be a little bit more, because even if you just had to willpower your way through the whole thing, it would be a very tough way to do it, but it's technically possible. But just to show yourself that you can do it, it's very valuable from that standpoint. But I think what ends up happening after you get your first 30-day badge, right? You want to be a little bit more technical and realistic in terms of how are you going to adopt this lifestyle. So you can start doing things like, okay, well, I'm going to set a rule for myself that I can still masturbate, but I can't watch porn. Again, it's not ideal, but it might be a step in the direction of starting to adopt a porn-free lifestyle. You could also use the technique of saying, okay, well, I'm going to make sure that I don't do any kind of fappage or fapping, I don't know how to say that, during the week. But on the weekend, I will plan a relapse, but when I relapse, I won't watch any porn, right? So you might have to take those steps first, but in my personal opinion, you should just dive right in first, try to hit those 30 days. If you end up relapsing early on in week 1, week 2, week 3, I'm glad you brought this up because so many guys unfortunately will fall off. What I suggest that you do is just get right back into it again,
Yeah.
and then instead of just saying, okay, well, I heard this put well once. It was some YouTuber. He said, if you fail, if after No Nut November, make sure you have a plan because you don't want it to turn to Dick December. So,
Yeah.
so it's the same thing. If you fail in November, the game kind of
Yeah.
changes. So in order to still kind of participate in this challenge, what I would suggest you do is just to start counting your relapses and saying, okay, well, I only
Yeah.
relapsed twice, so I didn't get the full 30-day streak, but I still accomplished something amazing. In the span of November, I only watched porn twice.
That's
so that's
still a win
pretty
if
impressive. It's like a bronze medal. It's not a
that's
gold
still
medal.
a win if you ask me, Kevin. I think you want to set yourself up for success. I talk about this a lot with this especially the idea of setting yourself up for failure or success. I think if you enter No Nut November without a clear goal other than to make it all the way through without relapsing, that you're setting yourself up for failure, especially if you've never done this before. And so, what I would challenge people to do is, first of all, go in with a clear goal of like what would be a win for you. Not to say that you should enter with like not having, you should have the mindset of, I'm going to make it all 30 days. But to be realistic enough to say, what would still make this successful to me? And to keep that in mind, that you're not being too hard on yourself if you do relapse in the first week or second week. Because as I mentioned, going forward, especially, I'm going to be talking a lot about the idea of shame, because I think shame is not conducive to success in this endeavor. You need to be okay with falling, especially if you have a strong addiction, a strong tendency towards something like porn and fapping. And I think the difficult part is finding that middle ground where you're not being too hard on yourself, but you're not being too easy on yourself either. And the way that I like to look at it is like this. If you fall, whether it's week 1, week 2, week 3, whether it's 4 months down the road, you do not dwell on it. Pick yourself back up by the bootstraps, keep moving, and focus on the positives. Think about how far you've gone. Think about the fact that this is still worth it. What is my end goal? And that's something we're talking about moving forward into the next few episodes. Having our why, I think, is going to be a really big part of it. But I also think, if week 3 all your friends have fallen off, if your only goal is to win, that's not going to be enough to make it to week 4 if you've already won in week 3. You need to have another reason. And also, I encourage you, if you fall in week 1 or 2, you got to keep going. If not just for yourself, for your buddies, the people you're doing this with. And so I'll just...
Yep. The game...
Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I was just going to say the game kind of just changes a bit. It's instead of just identifying yourself, and I'm so glad you brought this up, instead of just taking on the identity of like, oh, I lost, I'm a loser, and because I'm a loser, I'm just going to do what makes me feel good, because what's the point, right? That's the kind of the same mentality that some people who do like a crash diet have, where they're just like, oh, well, I failed my diet and I'm a loser and I'm a failure, so I'm just gonna do what makes me feel good. I'm just gonna eat all this pizza, yum yum yum, and then you end up even further addicted, just right back to where you started. So instead, if you can shift your mindset and say, okay, well, I'm actually just gonna change. The game just changes now. Instead of a 30-day challenge, it's gonna be me minimizing the amount of times that I relapse within a month, and then after that, maybe you can try again in December. Maybe you can try again in January. I still do strongly believe that everyone has the capability to get 30 days, and as difficult as it is, I think that should be a goal for people to strive for, just to know that they can do it. Because once you know that you can do 30 days, then you can start really adopting a certain lifestyle to really kind of wean yourself off of the addiction that you've been building up for some guys for decades.
Yeah, Kevin, I think that's great that you mentioned that aspect of it. Sorry to cut you off there. I just wanted to add a couple other things really quickly.
No, go ahead.
Number 1, I think if you're maybe 1, 2, 3 months into this, that 3-day mark Kevin was talking about is still there. It just ends up being closer to 2 weeks. And that makes sense, right? Because if you're dealing with a dopamine dependency, if you're putting off something like this, you're going to get strong urges. It's like if you quit something else cold turkey. There's going to be a period in time where your body is going, hey, where is this thing? I'm used to having this. And you're going to get a very intense feeling, whether it's day 3 or 2 weeks in, depending wherever you're at. You're going to get a very intense urge to go watch porn. And then the real question ends up becoming, how do you tackle that? Because in my experience, it's very intense, but it's a very short amount of time. So if you understand your triggers, you can kind of anticipate when that's going to happen. And then you can set yourself up for success by going out and doing something to combat that. So that's one thing I would mention, especially for what you mentioned in week 1, Kevin, as far as week 3, when all your other friends are falling off, I think it's really important that you establish beforehand, hey, we're going to talk to each other as we go. We got to lift each other up during this process. So if it's you and one other guy, that you're a team almost. You call each other up during the week, ask each other how you're doing. Try to, it's like when you got a lifting buddy, right? I don't want to do that last rep, but Kevin's pushing me to do the last rep. So I'm going to pound it out even though it's not fun. And if I was on my own, I wouldn't do it. That's what week 3 and week 4 are going to have to look like, guys. Because I guarantee you, if you're dealing with a real addiction, No Nut November is not going to be easy. That's why it's a challenge.
Yep, absolutely spot on, man. Yeah, it's a challenge, but there have been people before you that have been able to accomplish it. Yours truly, but then also Peter and a bunch of other people as well. It's difficult, but you can get through it. You just have to be strategic about it, and you have to not lose hope, and you have to have a good support structure. So I'm gonna just to kind of conclude this episode, I'm gonna give kind of a rundown again of what to expect on a week by week basis. So week 1, the first 3 days, is gonna feel pretty great. Your foggy headedness is gonna be alleviated. That's when you're going to feel kind of like elated, and you're going to have a new kind of fresh perspective on life. Day 3 is typically when the urges start to come back again, but you can override that, no problem. And then typically you'll find the urges again arising right about at the 1 week point. And at that point, pretty much from then on, it's basically about every 5 to 7 days where you start to feel a temptation. And typically week 2 is difficult but bearable. Week 3 tends to be very, very difficult. And that's the point typically where a lot of guys have already dropped off, so your motivation is going to be lower. So like what Peter was talking about with having accountability and friends, maybe you can have something like, if you and your friends and your buddies are all doing this, you guys say, okay, well, whoever completes it wins a certain prize. I don't know what that is. Maybe you can figure something out among your buddies. And then typically if you can get over the hump of week 3, because week 3 is a crucible, I'm telling you, as someone who's done multiple, streaks like that, week 3 is always tough. And the other guys I talk to that have done it too, they always say week 3 is the toughest. And then after that, for week 4, typically because you can kind of see the finish line in the distance, you can just kind of, chug your way through it, trudge your way through it, I should say, and just kind of willpower your way through it, and you can cross the finish line. So that's what to expect out of those 4 weeks. Now, the next episode that we're covering, we're going to be talking about the importance of being a part of a community and finding an accountability partner during No Nut November. So, some of the stuff that we talked about in this episode. But also, one of the first steps that you can take is joining our Facebook group, which is the Fapstinence Fam Facebook group. It's a free Facebook group with a community of online bros from all across the world trying to do the same exact thing that you're doing. All the while you have experts like Peter and myself helping you guide you along the way, and providing you free resources and free help. And it's just, this challenge of No Nut November, you don't have to do it alone, especially if you don't have other people around you to help with, or to buddy up with. If that's the case, then that's all the more reason to join the Facebook group, because the beauty of the internet, the beauty of living in the 21st century is we can all stay connected. It's pretty cool. So anyway, thanks so much for watching the Fapstinence podcast. We'll see you in the next
guys
episode.
then. I hope you join us for No Nut November.